大家好，歡迎返嚟呢度我嘅 podcast, What You Thinking? A podcast that creates space for folks of the Cantonese diaspora, those that engage with the Cantonese communities, to share our thoughts on our cultures, our heritage, our futures, whatever is on our mind, all over tea or ta. Before introducing my guest, I want to acknowledge that I am a settler on these lands, and this podcast is being held on the traditional and unceded territories of the Chumash, the Tongva, and the Fernandino Tataviam nations. A land acknowledgement is like the tip of the iceberg, but I will continue to support with action as I learn about what it means to be a settler on these lands specifically. So, for today's episode, we have a special guest, Kaitlin Chan. A wearer of many hats, she is a cartoonist and a cultural worker in Hong Kong. They tell stories about quiet moments, friendship, and rhythms of daily life. Her work has appeared on platforms from The New Yorker Online to Oprah Daily, as well as educational spaces like Polytechnic University to Temple University in Japan. What can I say? They're heckin' cool. Super excited to welcome Kaitlin.
Hi, Pearl. It's an honor to transition our friendship from, URL to slightly more IRL. And 我都想有多啲機會同朋友補充我嘅廣東話，所以呢個機會對我真係好重要。And 都想做啲想望新朋友啦。
Yes, I am also very happy about this bridging of we're still in the digital space, but becoming more in real life, like you're saying, and being able to speak Cantonese with others too is really amusing. So I'm also very, very excited for this. Yay!
Podcast, let's go.
Yeah. So today, as I don't know if I've explained on any other podcast episode. There's one before this one, but this podcast, if you didn't know, the ta in the title means tea and Cantonese, and so this is a low pressure conversational roundtable where both of us just talk over tea. And so I would like to ask Kaitlin, 你飲緊咩啊茶 or ta tones?
我應該茶點用廣東話講 cranberry, but I did not. So it's a herbal cranberry tea because I'm sensitive to caffeine.
This is a mood. I also chose a caffeine-free tea. It's I don't know. Oh yeah, right there. It is pandan tea. I don't know how to say that.
I didn't know they had pandan tea. I love the cake and the bread.
So right, and then I found the leaves, and I was at a Southeast Asian market, and it was on a bottom shelf, and I was like, I don't know what this means, but it's green, and I feel like it's pandan, and then I bought it, and it was. And I'm just super happy to have it because it's caffeine free, and it's so nice and vanilla-ish, so good. I love this tea.
It's giving dessert tea before dinner.
True. This is a nice way to think of it. Okay, so I know this is a chill conversation, and I had sent you via email all these prompts that I have, but I just thought that it'd be nice to just have some and then see where the conversation goes. So we shall start with the first question, I guess. And I'm very curious to know what your current definition of family is and how it's evolved over time, from how you've defined family in the past, if anything has changed at all.
This is a fun and big question. I think
it's a big question.
That's in our preamble. I kind of feel like I used to overemphasize the generational and linguistic differences in my family, to an extent that I was kind of reaching a very stuck point in some of my relationships. We'll never understand each other, or we have different value systems. And that can be difficult also when a family is spread over different continents for different migration and historical reasons. So it can be very hard to feel in sync at times. And also there are ways in which Cantonese family gatherings, when you finally are all in the same place, follow very subtle codes of relation and hierarchy, right? And layer of who's allowed to talk or whose opinions are valid, which can be a bit intense. Or at times I used to be the cool punk thing is have antagonistic relationship to Cantonese family traditions or these different, sometimes patriarchal values. And I kind of feel it's not my mom did kind of tell me this would happen, because throughout my teenagehood, when I had this long emo phase, my mom was but everyone grows up and assimilates into society. You can't resist society forever.
Oh my gosh.
And I'd be no, I'm gonna be resistant of society forever. But I think what she meant, which I'm starting to come around to, is like sort of understanding that the things I thought that my family found a little different or strange about me are probably not front of mind for them, or also that like there's a desire to feel like we have each other, especially during these times of like a lot of particular upheaval and different personal traumas. So instead of approaching these dinners or engagements as like stressful confrontations of different things, I'm kind of just remember like, let's try to imagine that everyone's approaching this in good faith. And also that there's can be a lot of joy and like warmth in these large gatherings because you don't have to have these in-depth conversations about your values. At times you're kind of just laughing and trying to connect over linguistic holes, and like you're just saying whatever you're like whatever phrases you have at hand. But also the way that the food and the drink are so fire also helps, I think. But yeah, I used to kind of feel like, well, my family's kind of like on this weird island because most of my maternal family who I'm more connected to are in different parts of the world. So it's kind of just like my mom, my sister, and I in Hong Kong, this little like matriarch family that's kind of weird and disconnected. We're called the family in Hong Kong, actually, by the rest of our family.
Family.
Yeah, not that many of us left, like in terms of like extended family. But I also think it's nice to think of it in different groups. And also starting as like more people in my age group of late 20s, early 30s move into like traditional marriage or children, also trying to remember like there are like friends of mine who are building these alternative family structures that do actually matter, especially when it comes to holidays where some people are estranged from their parents, like making sure all of us have a place to eat or go or do things so we can like make each other basically feel like there are some people who aren't just like fly by in your life and then go away, which is what I hope family can mean, which is like something steadfast without being toxically codependent.
Ooh, my goodness. First of all, thank you for sharing like all of that. I feel like one, yes, that was a very big question, but like two, thank you for sharing all of that. Cause yeah, it's such an interesting thing to think about. Like from what you have said, like it already seems like, yeah, like a huge amount of growth. Cause I'm trying to think of like the journey of like, I am, it reminds me of like turning red. Like I am separating from my family. I am growing into my own person. Like they're over here, like you don't understand me kind of thing. And then like also kind of coming to a place of like maybe they don't need to in the same way like you're saying like sometimes we don't have to unpack all the things at like a dinner or just like a hangout or something like that. And that's been something that I've also had to learn because I feel like for me like I have this like real strong desire of like you need to understand me. And I think like the title of like family member or whatever has like this expectation that I put on it, but also society puts on to be like the people who understand you most. And so like sometimes relationship building gets like blocked in that way because it's like, oh, you have these expectations that people aren't like meeting because of like how you think they're supposed to show up in your life. And so like that's really interesting to think about. But I think what's also like a nice thought, like you were saying, how people are forming family in like non quote unquote traditional ways, and also like the fluidity of family being more I guess accepted or more talked about. Cause like even if people come and go, but even if people come and go, I feel like there's a constant like the constant is like the change, and the constant is that you could still find family even if like they have moved on or you have moved on from that relationship. So like that's really like a nice thing to think about.
Wow, the maturity, yeah, it's emanating because I think that um it can feel hard when I don't know if you have experience, we don't have to talk about it, but I also think sometimes talking about family can come up or bring up feelings of um, questioning trust or having abandonment issues. And these are things that I feel like we used to sort of say were the story of my life. And that's why I get a little bit intense about certain friendships. And then also realizing that like sometimes it can just be really magical for something to serve us at a certain period of time. And then we move in our different directions. And I feel like also those different normative family structures are not really accommodating to that kind of flux. But what seems to be proven across all my different friends across different orientations and ages is that like everyone's changing a lot in their lives, especially the friends I've had over 10 years. So I think we need to be like graceful and compassionate of that. And also it's made me realize some of my family members who I thought had more entrenched conservative values are kind of like shifting those a little bit. Like it's not a drastic change, but I think that there are open possibilities for conversation. And like I used to think like I have two selves, like who I am with my friends, and my real values, and then I have to like literally like femme cosplay with my family or whatever. But also, I don't think they even care that much. I'm like, I don't think my family like cares about my gender. So, well, maybe some of them have thoughts about it. Like some of them have said sort of catty things about my hair or my clothes, but I'm like, you can say that, and then we move on. Like, I'm not going to change my entire aesthetic and gender presentation for like an auntie I see twice a year. So I feel like there are ways in which we start to realize like there are different combinations that can be made, and we're not like offending or hurting our culture by having different kinds of fluid presentations or values, when actually those are very historically rooted in our cultures anyway. So yeah.
Listen, every time I'm like, oh, this feels like such a like new, I don't know, way of like living, when like, and it's the way that we first got connected, like truly like got connected. Yeah, with the self-comb women in Sundak, and like just how they really were like, nope, this is an unconventional thing that we're going to do, but we're going to live together in this like collective like house and build family and probably be lovers and like all these different things. And I think that's so interesting too, because like another question that I had was like, if you felt that being Cantonese specifically and being raised the way that you were in Cantonese culture specifically, how like that like affects how you connect with others and like build relationships with others. And I'm wondering if it's like still changing because your definition of what Cantonese culture has changed too. Like I never thought queer culture, like when I was younger, I never thought like queer culture was part of Cantonese culture. And so like seeing that now, seeing Cantonese through a different lens, Cantonese history through a different lens, I'm like, oh, like maybe the way that I am connecting with people, like that I could identify that as like I am connecting in a Cantonese way, like in a specific Cantonese way. I don't know if that makes sense, that question, but
I really think it does. Maybe like some other children growing up in Cantonese families, I didn't think like this is like such a almost cliche thing to say. I think I've heard it a lot of times, but like discussing your feelings in a more verbal or explicit way is not super normalized or valued. And also, I guess I think I had a very unbalanced way of thinking that like Cantonese culture was all about a kind of like vernacular thing, like kung fu movies or like certain kinds of food. And I didn't really associate it with like culture with capital C, like art, literature, and music. And that actually is really silly and just like due to my own ignorance. But I think that I used to kind of put it in those categories where I was like, these are like the high Western values of like education with civility. And then Cantonese culture is like, it's almost like this, I don't want to use the word like wild, but like untrappable thing, because there are words that are spoken in Cantonese that are not written, and it's oral history, and it's a dialect that can't be, that wasn't standardized or enforced, or actually is now, as you know, in as the threat of disappearance. So in that way, it's always kind of been like literally in terms of language marginal. So I think that I was a little bit like resistant to using it as language, and also the cultural values I associated with it, I thought were on the more regressive side. I think because I started to think about like human rights or learn about social justice from a very typically Eurocentric and American lens. So I started to like form these two like sort of paths in my mind. And I think now I sort of feel like there's just so much more information and representation and things that are happening. And like there's like this Cantonese director, Ray Young, who made this film Sok Sok. I don't know if you've seen it.
I've heard of it. It's actually been on my list to see. It's the two uncles who fall in love, right? Like secretly? Yeah, or not so secretly.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful film that I think addresses a lot of these ideas of how we make a family and what we really value towards the end of our lives. And also, he actually did employ some older gay activists to act in that film. And then they're having a really important community discussions about aging as an older, queer, and sometimes single Cantonese person. And when I watched that documentary, I was feeling really emotional because I just looked at these, you know, gay men in their 70s and 60s, and I was thinking like, these people are just as much as part of the city or building its culture as other people. And also, like, the more you read or know or live here, you realize like literally queer and trans people are like part of the cultural fabric and historical legacy of Hong Kong, but are just, as you said, weaved into these more intricate patterns that you have to be looking for in order to see, or you have to want to see in order to see. Because of course there are people who like don't perceive or think that queerness exists here, and I just think it's because they don't want to see it. Like they'll see queer couples and they'll be like, oh my god, those cute best friends, and it's like, yeah, they might be best friends who are also lovers, but people have difficulty seeing what they don't want to see. So I sort of feel as if my own relationship to Cantonese culture has developed because both in terms of the cultural affinities and familial relations are developing and becoming more complex. And I've also met a lot of older queer activists and artists in Hong Kong, and seeing the fact that they have survived and still choose to make this place their home is very inspiring to me, because I want to believe that there are ways to, I don't know, continue to have these relationships. And I remember there was actually an exhibition of LGBT art that opened in Hong Kong a few months ago. And one of my friends, who's an older gay guy, invited a bunch of his women friends, some of whom are lesbians, and all of them are over the age of 50. And we were just having this little tour together. And I was like, these people are so cool. And I just like laughed and chatted a lot the whole day. And I was like, I haven't hung out with people over the age of 50 all day, like in a really long time. And it felt really like healing and fun to be like, we all vibe with each other here. And there's a respect for people's different life experiences, for like the moms who've been married with kids, or some of them are widowed, or some of them are like lesbians with girlfriends in their 60s. And I was like, all of us are connecting and can be friends across these things. So it kind of just, I feel like my brain was so small and now it's like starting to open to the possibilities of like inter-community and intergenerational dialogue, and not feeling antagonistic towards things, because we all know like the idea that Cantonese culture is inherently sexist or patriarchal or queerphobic is just a mainstream social norm, and that's just like one thing that the authority is promoting, but it's not the way that every single person in Hong Kong feels. So I just feel like, or every single person in Cantonese culture feels. So yeah, sorry, I don't know if that answered the question, but that's just like seeds I want to sprout, and I want to hear your own thoughts about how you've been connecting with other Canto folks or relating to your own family tradition or values.
Tradition or values. Yeah. On the topic, just to like give my thoughts about like the intergenerational aspect, like you were saying, I think it's interesting how you were saying it was really healing to be around and spend time with folks who are of different backgrounds, but also different ages. This is not like I did not go to this place. It was not like a Cantonese centered space. I went to like a yarn shop to knit, sorry, and crochet with a friend, with my friend James. Shout out to James for inviting me, because at the table there were all these different women who are retired or like just about to retire, or maybe in their 40s, but just like a variety of different folks. And I was like, oh, like I kind of miss this. And I think I also miss it in a way where like when you hang out with biological family, like you kind of get that intergenerational kind of like relating and FaceTime. But when for me so far with chosen family, like, oh, sometimes it's harder to like be in those spaces where it's as diverse age-wise as maybe hanging with your family. And so like I can totally like just like envision how you felt like just with those folks and being like, oh, it's kind of like something you didn't know you needed. And then when that like feeling is like quenched or whatever, you're like, oh, that's so nice. Like I love, yeah. So you're saying like the expansion of just like, wow, this is how life can look in these different ways as well. Like that's really wonderful. And so like, yeah, so that's something that I want to continue to do for myself as well, is to put myself in those spaces to kind of like get those experiences in terms of like moving on to like celebrating traditions and stuff with chosen family. This was a question that I also had for you too. And I don't know what turning point there was for you, if there was kind of like a remarkable turning point for you for celebrating or starting to celebrate Cantonese traditions with others. But like for me, when I decided at 22 to like move out because like my mother's abusive, I was like, I'm not trying to deal with this. I realized like, oh wow, like so many things, even non-Cantonese holidays, I was like, oh, I don't have anyone to like celebrate with. Like that's such a new experience for me. And it was no different when Cantonese like holidays came in, or like traditions came in, like Changmeng, right? The grave sweeping day or whatever. I was like, oh, this is usually like when my family and I go and like visit like my atai in the cemetery and like do all the stuff. And I was like, oh my goodness, like how, like these are things I still care about. And like this is stuff I still want to engage with. I don't think it makes sense for me to lose the practice of celebrating these holidays and traditions just because I'm not connected with my biological family. So after a while, I started involving like my friends who were, I had a lot of Black friends in Vancouver who I was like, hey, do you want to do this with me? Do you want to fold dumplings on Lunar New Year's and Eve? Or like, do you want to like come to the cemetery with me? And like a lot of my friends who are even not Cantonese were like, yes, I absolutely would love to do that with you. And I think it was like a nice way of also bringing someone into the culture and teaching them about like this is what we do and this is what we eat, and it like also pushed me into a space of like learning, because I think we were talking over email as well, how like there's this weird feeling sometimes about feeling like an imposter in your own culture where you're like, no, I am Chinese, I am Cantonese, but like how come I feel this like weird feeling of like being an imposter in my own community and my own culture, where I'm trying to like read up on things that I should quote unquote know. But like I was never taught. So I'm gonna like look up these traditions and be like, actually, this is what I would like to do. And like that's also a way of like reclaiming that like holiday for yourself too. Cause sometimes like when you celebrate traditions with your family as well, it's like, I don't like how we do this. Like there's like it's not fun, or it's like there's always so much pressure, or everyone's cranky, like no one really wants to do this. And so doing it on your own time and like in your own way, through like rediscovery for yourself is like also really lovely. Sorry, that was like a long a long ways away from like your initial question, but
No, I love that because it feels like what you've been able to embrace with your friends is also like resisting ideas of cultural, not to make it too heavy, but like resisting ideas of like cultural purity and hegemony. Cause I kind of feel like that is the way in which we trap ourselves away from the culture when we realize actually there's room for different shifts or transformations, or like there's also no one person here like in the world who's the authority on Cantonese culture who's like this way of doing is wrong, this way of doing is right. So it's like whatever way in which you can incorporate, whether it's Qingmingjie and like, like honoring your ancestors in different ways, or whether it's the kind of food that you would make, or whether you do lo hei, which is a bit more Southeast Asian, or if you do the dumplings for the New Year Eve, or even this like Rian Xiaojie. There's like so many festivals that it's funny because Hong Kong, because it was a former British colony, you get so many Western holidays and then so many Chinese and Asian holidays. It's just like we have this joke that like, okay, everyone here overworks and you have no paid leave, but then you have so many public holidays, almost bounces out. I feel like there are at least, so many different interesting occasions here. And like, let's say, for example, like Mid-Autumn Festival, most people just associate it with mooncakes, but also let's say if you don't have children, can you still do the lantern walk? Like there's all these questions of like,
man,
what feels fun and good, and getting to make them up and DIY it like it sounds like you've done sounds really freeing and fun. And just getting to, because also sometimes these holidays will fall at times where you're just like maybe having a depressed or stressful period and all you want to do is just eat like 2 green tea mooncakes in bed and FaceTime a friend. It's also fine. So it's kind of nice to feel like you at least get to give yourself the permission to engage to the extent to which you feel comfortable at that time, and not be like, okay, like I guess I just have to do this because it's obligation and tradition. And I do see like in more traditional households, the ways in which especially people who are socialized as women are asked to like cook and perform the hosting and emotional coddling of everyone. And I'm like, that is valid if that's some people's like truest desire and ambition, but I also just feel like it's not fair like just to have to do that on so many given days of the year. So I do think that it's nice to get to at least tailor these things to feel like they're more suited to like where you're at with your friends or where your values are.
agree. Yeah. And that's the thing too. Again, it's like the fluidity of the culture. Like it's interesting and like not surprising. Also, my nose, sorry, it's in the light, highlighted. But it's like no surprise that there are some people who are very much like the Cantonese culture police. And it's like that I feel like you're saying like what you're saying about like the rigidity of like not allowing people, and basically at the gatekeeping of like Cantonese culture to the point of like you're not allowing it to like form into or expand into a different type of way, especially when like other Cantonese people are engaging with that. Like I just feel like it's not helpful for everyone, because it's a binary, like we don't need to like keep it like that. And so there are some people, like you were saying, like there's some people who really want to like dive into the we're going to prepare this, like I'm a woman and I want to participate in this certain type of way with a certain type of tradition, and like that's super cool if that's like for you, but also it's not a standard, or it shouldn't be like the only standard, because there's so much to like Cantonese traditions that I don't even know. I don't even know so many. I feel like I know like five, maybe like five holidays, maybe three to five. Um, and it's like really interesting to think about just, yeah, like what you could do for yourself, like lying in bed, eating a mooncake, or FaceTiming a friend, or all these different kinds of things. And yeah. And like, have you, I'm curious if you have like vocalized these like the want to celebrate traditions in a different way with like your own friends like in Hong Kong right now? Like, is that something that other people are also feeling? Or is that something that has come to like their attention only because like you brought it up and then but then they also are like, actually, yeah, like that's something I haven't thought about or haven't articulated, but like that is how I feel. Like I'm just curious about that whole kind of like falling in of like trying to celebrate holidays with one another.
I feel like I see it percolating in all these different ways. Like there's times that's it's a little bit less now, but like one of my friends, Karen, who her name is Karen Chung, she's a writer, and she wrote a really interesting book called The Impossible City, which is kind of about her complex relationship to Hong Kong and Cantonese-ness. And she writes a lot in the book about not spending a lot of holidays with her families and also wanting to form her own kind of network. And then she noticed that there was a lot of young people organizing. In her case, she loves music, so indie music gigs around these times of year, like it was like Mid Autumn Festival. And then she has a really descriptive passage of eating a mooncake from a plastic box, like at this music gig with all these other people who were not with their families that night. So I kind of feel like, you know, when there's a desire, there are community. Like there's definitely people who are feeling the same way, or maybe some people who were at a dinner that was a little bit painful for them, and they get to leave the dinner and then go to this gig and be like, okay, these are also my people. So I do feel like there's definitely trends of that happening. And for myself, I, like many other young Hong Kong people, live with my mom until like throughout my 20s, and I moved out when I was 27. And I started to have this thing where all my friends who I know who have parents abroad or are maybe not in touch with their parents, we usually do the holidays together. Like we did Mid Autumn Festival together last year, and it was really fun. And there was like a lot of board games, and like we did this corny thing towards the end where someone's like, "We haven't actually looked at the moon yet, guys." So we opened my window and we just craned our short little necks to try and see the moon from behind all the buildings in my district. And of course, it was like mainly covered. But we were like, this is what they used to do, like gaze at the moon and write poetry in the bamboo grove. Even though let's be real, like people who did that were like mainly men, and everyone at my gathering was not a man. But it was just very warm to do that. And I remember thinking, we're good enough. Like, because most people were posting their like cute, you know, traditional family, like mid-autumn gatherings. And I was like, our gathering's good too. Like we've got homemade food, and okay, we pre-ordered some mooncakes, and it wasn't like as lavish or as luxurious, but it was our own little luxury of not being alone. And also for my friends who don't really want to spend as much time with their parents, just feeling like I still have something to do tonight. And that can be hard, I think, to be the one who volunteers and raises their hand. So I usually just like will a little forwardly start a group chat and be like, who wants to hang out with me in like mid-autumn? I'm lonely. Like if I position myself as a lonely one, then people will be like, oh yeah, okay. So I feel like there is a little bit of initiative taking and sort of like hand raising that needs to happen, because I also think everyone maybe might have the attitude of like, oh, everyone else is going to spend it with their like family of origin, so I guess just be alone in my living room. When it's like, please let us not all be alone in our rooms at the same time, if we can sync up in one room if we want to. So I feel like there is that desire that sometimes happens. Or I have one friend who, my older gay friend, Carrie Block, he's like this art director, photographer in Hong Kong, and he hosts really amazing different parties and gatherings at his studio space. And he hosted this like Lunar New Year party. And I just felt so touched, because it was this room with like, you know, some traditional families that were married with children, and then also different queer and trans people of all different ages and different races. And we were all dancing, and he rented a disco ball that night. And I was like, this is Lunar New Year. I almost like cried about how happy I felt, and I danced a lot that night. But I was thinking, it's kind of cool that we're all hanging out and together, because I've never been to something like that. Because I only associate Lunar New Year with like bi-lean and age hierarchy, and then praising people who are married and asking when people are going to have kids. And it's so like not just heteronormative, but like kind of boring. And then to be at this party, I was like, this is also possible too. And like, you know, the children are welcome here. And it's like, this family is a beautiful thing. It's not like a sinful necessary thing. Because I feel like the way that politicians here frame it is that to be in the LGBT community is to be an affront to family, or to be living a lifestyle considered dangerous, right? And then I just looked at this room of everyone laughing and drinking and talking and being nice to each other. And I'm like, this is not dangerous. So this is my reality versus the rhetoric is some kind of imagination. So I do feel like there are these little openings of people who are really opening their space and time to organize either events or gatherings that bring people together in a way that feels a little bit more fresh and exciting, and not like we have to do everything with these steps. Because I'm like, if it's a holiday, why are we making it like military rules? Like it should be fun holiday. Have we heard of, like I know it seems wild. Cantonese people can be so intense about following rules, but yeah.
No, I feel that. I feel like the following the steps, it's like, I don't know. I feel like sometimes people get mad at me for saying this, but I'm like, everything we do is literally made up. Like we have made up literally me saying these words out of my mouth, made up. Like we just get to decide like what we want to do and what is tradition. And I think that like how is like sitting in joy and like wanting to be around others who will like also bring joy to you and like you to them, like that is never a bad thing, and to like be shunned outside of the queer like topic, but like within that especially too, because queer joy is very important. But it's so interesting to like think about how yeah, there are so many times where I thought like a younger me thought, wow, these traditions, like, I don't want to engage. Like, why do we do this all the time? Like you're saying, why are the same questions? Who are you dating? Are you going to have a child? If like all these different things that I'm just like, oh, like, it's kind of, I don't know. It doesn't feel like fresh, like bringing in the new year when it's like same vibes from like last year. I don't know. Especially when the new year is supposed to be like new outfit, like good food, like bringing in the new look. And then it's like, oh, it's like the same, like sometimes stale, tedious, like questions. You're like, damn. Um, and sometimes it kind of ties in, you know, with like, you know, the generational trauma of like, oh, I don't like in the case of like my pop hong gong gong, like there is like a very like small kind of scope of how they relate to me, because that's like the tools that they have, you know, like, oh, are you hungry? Oh, how's work? How, you know, and like those are things that they say because they care about you. um and it kind of loops into the whole like they don't gotta understand you to like love you and like all these different things. But anyway, but when it comes to like tradition, it's like, oh no, now we can like define it again, like reclaim, redefine like what celebrating like New Year's, Lunar New Year is to us. And like I think that's so cool that you had that experience and like that others were like super down to, and the whole, how can I say, opening of yourself and your ideas about, hey, so I am alone. Is anyone else alone? We should be alone together on this holiday. I think is like so nice, because I think a lot of us do feel that way. And then, you know, we're just like, oh no, we just assume, oh, they're probably with their family. Or sometimes too, like societal cultural expectations of like, you got to be good with your family, like you got to be solid with your family. A lot of people are not solid with their family. Like I have like a really not great relationship with my mom, and like I felt like for a very long time I was the only one who was like that. And then I started like saying things out loud, and then other people were like, oh no, that's been me for like 10 years. And I'm like, excuse me, like I didn't know, I thought I was the only one. So I could totally see the whole thing with like holidays and being like, you know, this is the way that like usually people celebrate, or a lot of people celebrate, but it's like we can do our own thing and have a good time, and like also create a safe space. Because like sometimes those like events when you go with your family and like you are asked those questions, like can really trigger you. Like the whole like kids question, I'm like, what if I can't have kids? You know, like what if that's something that's a sore spot? Like there's so many things that can just happen with that kind of like heteronormative, also just plain normative kind of questions in our culture. So yeah, I think it's great that we're like, there are some people who are open to like, yeah, just like creating a new path or walking a new path, and or yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I just the way you're talking about trying to like just break that silence, I think is really important, because I think now that I started to have these chosen family holiday gatherings, I noticed more friends than I thought are trying to take a little distance from their family or are not on speaking terms with their parents at the moment. And I feel like maybe these films will change in the future, but it's important to hold space for that moment and not be like, go fix it with them now, go hash it with them now. It's like some of my friends don't want to hash it out with them now. Or sometimes people, if they're not willing to have conversation about meeting in the middle, because I do feel like, it can't just be this traditional value of like the children should always kowtow to their parents, that don't matter what age they're at. Because if kowtowing means like effacing your entire self and values, like you can't ask people to live like that and think that it's just fine. Or some people might think that's fine because they're like family over everything. And if you want to live that way, it's fine, I guess. But I just think it's almost like kind of like slowly killing yourself a bit. So it's just really important to allow for those different kinds of distances, or also think about distance and silence as a form of healing and a way to be like, if I don't have this input or if I don't have this control, what does my life look like? And for some people, they really flourish under those conditions. And let's not stigmatize that. And also remember that, like, if we could just organize a society so people's homes and resources are not just concentrated on the nuclear family, then there could also be ways for people to feel less alienated from themselves. I don't know.
No, I feel that. Yeah, I feel that, especially the point about like the nuclear family need to be like all you ever need. And I think a lot of Asian cultures in general have that kind of mentality of like, this is all you ever need. Why are you looking outside of your family to get your needs met? And like, that was something that I also had to learn about, and I'm still learning about, when trying to get your like needs met outside of your nuclear family, and like forming like community, period. And like other people throughout life like raise you. And I think that's not something that's really talked about in like Cantonese families. It's just like, we raised you, you're an adult, you're out in the world now, and like, but you still have duties to be like a good insert whatever, good daughter, good grandkid, good whatever. And so like, it just doesn't feel like, for me, it doesn't feel like there's space to like grow and like just like question either. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of space to question. And like, I'm really curious too, if like your family members, because we kind of touched upon like generational differences, and like some language barriers too. And I'm wondering, have you ever had this kind of conversation about like community or celebrating in a different way outside of just with your biological family to your biological family? I like, sometimes for me, I would not be able to do that with my papa and gong gong. Like, I don't have the language for that. Like, I would just be like, I had a good like day. I don't know, like I enjoyed myself. Like, I went out with my friends, but I wouldn't emotionally be able to convey like, this is what this means to me. And I'm wondering if that's something that you have done with your family at all, or if that's something that you don't want to do. Anything you want to share?
Yeah, I feel like when it comes to my mom and my sister, we've had our rocky moments, but I do feel like we're quite close overall because we have had a lot of conversations, especially over the past 5 years, about accepting different kinds of things. And also because my mom lost my dad in her 40s when I was a teenager, and she has intentionally chosen to do her own thing. I do feel like she learned a lot about what her own identity, what it means to be a woman in society, and also continue to live the way she's living, which she's very much included in different people's gatherings, but also some of her friends have curiosities about her life and her choices. But I feel like she has learned a lot about herself, even under very tragic and difficult circumstances. So in that way, my mom and I often try to talk about things like feminism or gender, and it can be fun and challenging, but also I guess it does help that she grew up in Australia, so we both have English as a first language. And we actually went to this like feminist talk series recently, like a couple of years ago, and it was so fun to talk to a woman who's born, X amount of years before me, about our own relationship to how we think about these gender roles in society, or even gender binary. And that talk series, I feel like, really opened us up to different possibilities, because I used to think like, oh, my mom has these values or is this way or holds these things, and then getting to break that ice very slowly. And also it's mainly me, like, I don't want to say indoctrinating, but like I sent her a lot of articles and podcasts, and I'm like, what about this? Hey, like, feel like she's opening herself up to those things and being like, oh yeah, she'll be really cute sometimes and be like, have you heard of chosen family? Like, she'll tell me all these new things, and I'm like, yeah, let's talk about it, because in some ways she mainly celebrates all holidays now with different friends. So in some ways, my mom, as a straight woman, is also building her own chosen family. So I do feel like my mom, my sister, and I had those conversations more readily. I guess when it comes to my extended family, I have a lot of feelings. And as we talked about code switching before, like I don't know, like my grandma and my grandpa on my maternal side, I did hear from my cousins that they voted no on marriage equality in Australia. And also that they've said things about like my haircut, or I think they're worried about like my prospects as a woman eligibility for a man things. And I'm like, of course they're thinking about that because that's how they think I'll be safe. Like that's how they think I'm going to be loved. So I try and think about it as like they want a heteronormative marriage for me as a way of loving me, even though that might not be my future. I just think that like it's their attempt at trying to, and they're not like forcing me. I do feel lucky that like they'll make these little comments and I think they're concerned because I think that what they might think is that I'm having this like extended adolescence because it's kind of like, well, when is she going to find her man and, you know, start her family? And it's like maybe low key never, right? So I do think that it's like, they might think I'm suspending a kind of adulthood, but they're also entering their late 80s at this point. Actually, my Google also passed away 2 years ago. So I do think that my papa was almost like, I don't think I'm going to live the day to see Kaitlin walk down that aisle in the white dress, and maybe it's fine because what we do together now is literally just like eat dim sum and watch TVB Pearl Jade or whatever the channel is for the Cantonese TV. It's Jade, TVB Jade. And that's also a form of hanging out. And we do Tai Chi in the garden, and like we don't have a lot of like things going on. And I know there's parts of my life that I'm not comfortable to share with them yet that I don't think I will. And I think that like also some people might stigmatize that and be like, you should be transparent or you should be open, when I'm like, it's not lying. Like I'm not lying about who I am to my family, but they don't like really need to know. Like we just meet in this time and we share the space. And as you said, like the vocabulary is limited, and like that's fine. Like I don't think everyone in your life needs to know you at the exact same level, because then that's what creates like internal conflict and suffering and being like, no, but if we don't get to this level, then they'll like not really love me. When I'm like, the love is real and they might want different things from me, but it's okay for me to want different things because in the end I'll have to live my life. Like they don't have to live my life, you know? So I know some people do feel more strongly like, I have to have kids for my parents. I have to get married for my parents. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, yeah, but you're the one like marrying and having the children. I'm like, think about how it's going to impact your life so drastically, please. Like, I just think that, as you said, entrenched family culture is such a big part of Cantoneseness and also the broader Asian diaspora. But also, I think we are starting to have these conversations more openly now. Like, one cannot just live for their family and be like, it's okay because everything I've ever done is like for my family. And then it's like, well, like, who are you? Like, it's so scary to be an Asian adult and then be like, wait, I don't know who I am. But I feel like so many of us come to that point because we are just asked to, you know, outsource our identity to a different kind of cultural value or family. And that can be so scary. And I talk to Cantonese friends all the time who are like, sometimes I don't think I know what I want because I just think about what my parents offer me all the time. And I'm like, that's really heavy. And you're 29. And can we start to inject little parts of you into your life more? I don't know. It's hard.
No, that's so real. I feel like, oh, first of all, that was so great. I was like, I don't want to like disrupt the audio, but like snaps.
No, but I want us to be in conversation, so interrupt me anytime.
But like I really on the stance of like thinking about how other family members quote unquote worry about you and like say things out of like their concern, and you seeing that as like because they want to see you be safe or, you know, be like taken care of or whatever, in whatever way that means to them, is a very empathetic lens. I will say this for sure, because some people will be like, bitch, like, I don't really, I don't care about this. Like, how dare they say this about me? And that's true, because words are things, right? They affect you. But I think that's a very empathetic way of like looking at that. And I love that you shared that perspective with me, because like that really frames sometimes, like, I feel like that would help me frame also certain things that my family says where I'm like, I please like I will delete myself from this relationship if I hear another. But I think that like, yeah, I think that's a really nice way of thinking of it. And then in the second part of what you said, in regards to like, I don't know, just like, who are you living for, basically. I remember in high school, like in the ninth grade, my French teacher was like, when your parents are gone, remember, when your parents are gone, who will you be living for? And I was like, oh, snap. I'm like, ninth grade me, I'm like, okay, yeah. And then like thinking about that now that my papa and gong gong are gone, I'm like, that's real. Like, I feel like doing so many things under the title of like, oh, I'm a good grandchild, so I will do these things, which can sometimes mean like stuffing a part of yourself in a box or something. A lot. I did that a lot when I was younger. And like now Or there was a point where I was able to not do that anymore. And I was like, no, I'm gonna wear my nose piercing around. Like, I'm gonna like have bleached hair. I'm gonna do whatever. And like my grandparents were actually unfazed and they like really didn't care. And I was like, blink, blink, excuse me. Like, I thought you like placed importance on this. And so it's really interesting, like you were saying too, with age, like they were in their 80s at the time. And I'm like, you guys really don't care. Like, actually, like that is amazing. I'm glad that they have arrived at this place because it's easier for me. But I think that when it's even closer to home where it's like your parents, like I have never kind of had that like pressure in the same way that I've heard my friends express, where they're like, I couldn't study whatever I wanted to study because my parents wanted me to get a degree of whatever. Like I was allowed to study animation. Like that was not a normal response. A normal response from like a Cantonese parent, in my opinion. So there are like a lot of challenges, but I think like you were saying, it's like, oh, like now we are grown, like not all the way grown, but we're more grown than before. And being able to say that you like something is real, like is or not being able to is like something to look at as well. And I think that's like something that a lot of people actually like can't do. I couldn't do it a lot for like a lot of my 20s. I'm like, I don't know what I like. I don't know why. I don't know why I don't like something or why I do like something or what I stand for, what I don't stand for. It was very much like I live for my parent and like that is it. And so it's really nice to like see these conversations just like open up and like have ourselves like express the way that our personhood feels like it should exist. Like I think that's like a wonderful thing that we get to show up in these different ways. And I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying, you know, we get to do it all the time. Sometimes it's like, okay, like you're saying, I'm not lying to some of my family. I'm just saying they don't need to know about certain things because it's not important to the conversations that we're having all the time. So sometimes it's kind of like choosing when to do certain things for the sake of your peace or whatever. But I think this whole movement of kind of like feels like almost like a collective awakening of like the Cantonese diaspora of like our generation, kind of like reevaluating like how we would like to engage with traditions, holiday, family, even friends too, and biological family and chosen family. So yeah, that's this conversation has been like so insightful, and like thank you so much for like sharing everything that you have. We are coming up to the end of our podcast, but would you like to tell the folks about anything that you have going on right now or where people can find your work, etc.?
Well, I just want to really thank you too. This has been so like healing and fun, and it's just nice because I feel like, you know, it's one thing to like someone's work, but actually getting to connect as human beings. Wow, it's the bomb. And actually,
A
that's what
plus.
Canto is all about. Being Canto is all about connecting, especially over good food, but also it's fun because, well, I don't know about funny, but there's been a lot of discourse about Asian American identity, especially with the TV show Beef. And a lot of people have been talking about cultures of shame and silence with Asian American identity. And I feel like that's really valid. And I think that that's people's truth. And it made me realize my privilege of being an Asian person in Asia because I feel like we are the loudest people. Like I'm like being Cantonese and being from Hong Kong, I'm like, we are talking and shouting and laughing at like 8,000 decibels in every area of this place. Like even in the rural places, people are loud. So I was just thinking, there's a real beauty in the expressiveness of our language and our culture and our gestures. And I was on a minibus yesterday where my Cantonese bus driver was just singing, like no radio, a cappella singing his songs.
Amazing.
And a lot of people had their AirPods in, but I was just like vibing and I was like, let's break the silence, whether it's like the things we have between people we want to be connecting with more. It just feels like I'm glad that your podcast is a vehicle for which we can just connect and share space. Like that song. Oh, also, the guard in my building also sings, and sometimes
Oh my God.
with his permission, record his songs. And I've said it to my friends who are Canto who stay with me here, and they're like, he's so bomb at singing. And all just like, I don't know. Like,
That is
sort of
amazing.
breaking the stereotype of Asians as somehow, I don't know, quiet and submissive or robotic. I'm like,
Oh,
we're the most emotional, melancholy, loud people. I don't know if you know us, but all Cantonese songs are
dramatic. So everything.
yeah, Cantonese songs would be like thinking about my crush from 10 years ago as I look at the ocean, and you're like, what the heck? It's
Like
so
wow.
So there's that. Honestly, I don't have a lot to promote about myself. I feel like I'm in this like lay low, fallow, regenerative period where I'm like, what's art? Who am I? But I'm still on Instagram, that cursed platform. So my handle is Kaitlin, Kaitlin Chan. And you can connect with me and Pearl on there, I guess.
Yes, this is true. And vibing and just like having or creating space to like recalibrate is also something that is really necessary. And like, I'm glad that you're doing for that for yourself. And I'm glad that you took time out of your day or evening, I don't know what time it is there, to
Good
talk with me.
morning.
Oh, morning, Joseon. With tea. Thank you so much for talking. And everyone, also, if you want to stay updated, you could check out CantoneseConnection.com or follow me at Cantonese Connection on Instagram or Fumichun, Fumichun on Instagram. See you next time.